Once at a dinner party, Caligula reportedly burst into raucous laughter. When asked to explain why, his answer was so disturbing, it's impossible to forget. Caligula was the emperor of Rome between 37 and 41 AD. Remembered as a cruel and erratic tyrant, his deranged tendencies threw Rome into chaos, and eventually led to his violent death. Caligula came from a prominent line of Roman leaders. Julius Caesar was his great-great-grandfather, Augustus was his grandfather, and his father Germanicus was one of Rome's most effective and popular generals. Remarkable men all round, but Caligula would soon prove that the apple can fall very, very far from the tree. When young Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus was growing up, his father would dress him in a child-sized soldier's uniform whenever he brought him on campaign. As such, the troops took to calling him Caligula, which means little boots. Caligula was born as Emperor Augustus lay dying. The first Roman emperor named his stepson Tiberius as his heir, but with one very specific condition. Augustus deeply admired Caligula's father, Germanicus, and made Tiberius promise to make the great general his heir. Tiberius agreed, and Augustus died, completely unaware that his best-laid plans were about to go down in flames. One of Tiberius's first acts as emperor was to send Germanicus on a diplomatic mission, where the general mysteriously caught ill and died. But this was ancient Rome, and powerful people didn't usually drop dead without a reason. Rumours spread like wildfire that Tiberius had been behind Germanicus's death. Conflict erupted at the highest ranks of Roman society, and the aftermath was brutal. The young Caligula barely survived the fallout of his father's demise. His mother accused Tiberius of murdering Germanicus and sought revenge. Tiberius acted first and accused her and Caligula's two older brothers of treason. Agrippina died of starvation in exile on a remote island, and Tiberius had the two brothers imprisoned. One of them also died of starvation, and the other took his own life. In an instant, Caligula's entire family was gone. Through all of this chaos, Caligula was still just a young child, so he was spared. For most of his youth, Caligula's great-grandmother, Livia, shielded him from politics. But a sudden tragedy changed all that. Tiberius's son died, perhaps murdered by a political rival. Either way, Tiberius suddenly had no heir. In 31 AD, he summoned Caligula to his pleasure island of Capri and adopted the boy. Caligula despised Tiberius for what he did, yet the emperor still named him as successor. But why? According to contemporary accounts, Caligula, at least when he was young, was a gifted actor and managed to hide his true feelings. He served Tiberius so well that one writer commented, "Never was there a better servant, or a worse master." Even before he was emperor, Caligula had an innate viciousness. He enjoyed watching executions and indulged in scandalous behaviour at night. As he became more unhinged, the aging emperor commented, "I am nursing a viper in Rome's bosom." He often bragged that he once carried a dagger into Emperor Tiberius's bedroom with the intention of killing him, avenging his mother and brothers. Apparently, when he entered the room and found Tiberius asleep, he had a change of heart and left, but still felt like people had to know that he could have done it. While living as Tiberius's guest, Caligula befriended Naevius Sutorius Macro, the head of the powerful Praetorian Guard. Macro's good words helped soften Tiberius towards young Caligula, but Macro would come to regret ever knowing him. One historian, Tacitus, wrote that Macro smothered the dying Tiberius with a pillow to make sure that Caligula rose to the throne. But Suetonius claimed that Caligula himself ended Tiberius's life and ensured his rise to emperor. We'll never know what really happened, but the result was clear. Caligula took the throne, and Rome trembled. In the final years of his reign, Tiberius let Rome fall apart while he relaxed in his pleasure palace on Capri. As such, the people of Rome absolutely hated him by the time he died, so when Caligula took the throne, the Romans rejoiced. At Tiberius's funeral, he delivered a passionate and weepy speech in the deceased emperor's honour and gave him an extravagant burial. Based on historical reports, Caligula knew how to work a crowd. He put those abilities to good use on the day of his predecessor's funeral, despite his utter hatred for the man who murdered his family. The people of Rome had extremely high hopes for Caligula's rule. After all, he came from a pretty amazing pedigree, and many were sympathetic to the nightmares he went through as a child. And, believe it or not, he lived up to their greatest hopes. At first. He freed unjustly imprisoned citizens, gave bonuses to military men, and eliminated a highly unpopular tax. The Roman historian Philo described those first few months as blissful, but the bliss ended almost as quickly as it started. 6 months after taking power, Caligula suddenly fell ill, possibly by poisoning. He recovered, but by all accounts, the illness broke something in his mind, and Rome shook from the consequences. He began having his family members killed, beginning with his cousin and heir, Gemellus. His grandmother was utterly furious, but she too died shortly after. He had his father-in-law and brother-in-law executed, and his 2 living sisters exiled. When it seemed as though Caligula might die of illness, Macro made some political manoeuvres to try and save his own career. When Caligula recovered, he discovered Macro's plans, and condemned his one-time ally to a horrifying fate. He forced Macro, to whom he owed so much, to end his own life. In the chilling days following Caligula's near-fatal illness, he had nearly every single one of his close family members executed. One of the few to be spared his wrath was his feeble uncle Claudius, whom Caligula chose to keep around as an object of ridicule. Caligula's first years in office were a wild ride, but nearly everything he did had one thing in common: they were expensive. Whether it was lowering taxes or buying extravagances for himself, none of these came cheap, and Rome started running out of money fast. Caligula didn't just think of himself as a god, he resented the actual gods for being worshipped alongside him. He ordered the heads removed from statues of various gods all across Rome, and replaced them with his own likeness. Many historians, both ancient and modern, have tried to explain what made Caligula so mad. Some have speculated that he suffered from epilepsy. Some writers believe that he lived in constant fear of having a seizure, and this made him paranoid and cruel. To further the epilepsy diagnosis, multiple sources confirmed that Caligula couldn't swim, despite the fact that swimming lessons would have been a part of his education. One reason for this might be that he was afraid he would have a seizure and drown while in the water. By all accounts, Caligula wasn't a particularly formidable figure. Writers describe him as skinny, pale, and sickly, with hollow eyes and thin hair. He also apparently suffered from faintness throughout his life, periods where he was incapable of almost any effort. About halfway through his reign, Caligula broke with the Senate and started using every opportunity to humiliate them. Around 39 AD, he removed and replaced all of the consuls without asking the Senate's approval. He would also reportedly force senators to run alongside his chariot, dressed in their full robes. He laughed as he made everyone around them miserable, but he would eventually pay the ultimate price. The gladiatorial games were not only for public exhibition and political reputation, but also to serve up Roman justice. Criminals and slaves were often sacrificed to vicious beasts for entertainment, but apparently that wasn't enough for someone as bloodthirsty as Caligula. One day, the emperor allegedly found the day's activities to be a little dull, so he ordered his guards to throw an entire section of the crowd to the beasts to make up for it. As Caligula's behaviour became more erratic and cruel, critics began to question his actions. He soon became one of the most hated people in the entire empire. And did this bother the man who thought himself a god? No. He simply said, "Let them hate me, so long as they fear me." Rome didn't let Caligula's cruel and disturbing behaviour go unnoticed. Resentment grew in nearly every level of government. But in 40 AD, Caligula finally went too far, and in doing so, sealed his dark fate. So after years of cold-blooded killings and extravagant spending, what did Caligula do that finally led to his downfall? He decided to move. Caligula saw himself as a god, but no matter how hard he tried, most people still only saw him as an emperor. However, right across the Mediterranean in Egypt, people had spent millennia worshipping their rulers as divine. For someone as megalomaniacal as Caligula, that idea was too good to pass up. In 40 AD, he began making plans to permanently move to Alexandria, taking the capital with him. His plans were the last straw for many powerful people in Rome. If he moved to Alexandria, Rome and the people who lived there would lose their political influence. This would completely neuter both the Senate and the Praetorian Guard. Cassius Chaerea, one of Caligula's own guardsmen, knew this better than any, so he hatched a dark plan to put an end to Caligula's madness once and for all. Aside from the obvious political motivations, Chaerea had a personal vendetta against the emperor as well. Reportedly, Caligula often mocked Chaerea for his feeble voice and called him derogatory names in public. Caligula probably did this and worse to countless people in Rome, but Chaerea was one man he never should have crossed. On January 22nd, 41 AD, Caligula was busy speaking to a group of young actors in the corridors beneath his luxurious palace when Chaerea and his fellow conspirators appeared out of nowhere. According to reports, Chaerea struck first, but soon the entire crowd swarmed the emperor, viciously cutting him down where he stood. Strangely enough, the final moments of Caligula looked a whole lot like the final moments of his ancestor, Julius Caesar. Both were dictators with absolute power, and they were both stabbed 30 times by a group of conspirators led by a man named Cassius. Though the Praetorian Guard had turned on Caligula, his personal Germanic Guard was still rabidly loyal to him right to the end. When they arrived on the scene, the emperor already lay dead, but that didn't stop them from getting their mad revenge. They brutally attacked everyone around, conspirator or otherwise. After killing Caligula, his assassins tracked down his wife and their young daughter, determined to eliminate any trace of the emperor's bloodline. In a moment of utter cruelty that would have made George R.R. Martin proud, they allegedly killed Caligula's child, Julia Drusilla, by bashing her head against a wall. Next, the conspirators went looking for Caligula's sickly uncle, Claudius. Claudius wasn't exactly the most able combatant, so his response to his nephew's murder was to hide in a curtain. Luckily for him, a sympathetic soldier found him, and a faction of the Praetorian Guard quickly took him out of the city to safety. If the Senate had gotten its way, Caligula's ruinous end would have been the end of the Roman Empire. To their credit, his rule had been a pretty good example of why giving one man absolute power might not be the best idea. The senators set about restoring the Roman Republic, but there was one glaring problem. Caligula had been a total disaster of an emperor, but the Roman military still liked the idea of an empire. They rallied around Claudius and declared him the new emperor. Claudius wasted no time in executing the men who had killed his nephew, and the empire continued on, finally rid of its most deranged ruler. Caligula had a malevolent sense of humour. Once, at a dinner party, he reportedly burst into raucous laughter. When asked to explain the reason for his mirth, he replied, "I've just thought that I've only to give the word and you'll all have your throats cut." Yes, hilarious. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more videos.